The restaurant was quiet in that gentle, late evening way, where every clink of glass felt louder than it should. She moved carefully between tables, her steps soft, her eyes lowered, as if trying not to disturb the fragile calm. Everyone knew her as the shy waitress, the one who spoke little, smiled politely, and disappeared into the background. But what most people didn't notice was how her hands moved when she thought no one was watching, how her fingers shaped words in the air, silent yet full of meaning. She had learned sign language years ago for her younger brother, and, though he was gone now, the language had stayed with her like a quiet echo of love. That night, a wealthy-looking man entered the restaurant, his presence shifting the atmosphere instantly. Conversations hushed, heads turned. He walked with purpose, guiding an older woman beside him, his mother. Her eyes were kind, but distant, and when the hostess spoke to her, she simply smiled without responding. The son answered for her, his tone firm but protective. They were seated, and as fate would have it, the shy waitress was assigned to their table. She approached nervously, her usual greeting caught in her throat. The son ordered quickly, barely glancing at her, but the mother watched her closely. There was something searching in her gaze. When the waitress turned to leave, she hesitated just for a second, then gently signed, "Welcome, I'll take good care of you." The reaction was immediate. The older woman's face lit up, her eyes widening in disbelief, then filling with emotion. Her hands trembled as she signed back, slowly at first, then faster, as if afraid the moment might disappear. The waitress froze, surprised but relieved, and responded fluently, her shyness melting into something warm and confident. Around them, the restaurant seemed to pause, sensing something quietly extraordinary unfolding. The son looked between them, confused at first. He had spent years watching his mother struggle to communicate, seeing waiters grow impatient, strangers turn awkward. But now, here she was, laughing silently, her hands dancing, her face alive in a way he hadn't seen in so long. He leaned forward, his expression softening as he realized what was happening. And in that moment, something shifted, not just at the table, but in every heart that witnessed it. The son sat there in stunned silence, watching a version of his mother he hadn't seen in years, free, expressive, alive. Her hands moved quickly, her face glowing with emotion, as she spoke to the waitress in a language the world had so often failed to understand. The shy girl, who had once struggled to even speak above a whisper, now stood confidently, her fingers shaping words with grace, her eyes meeting the older woman's with warmth and respect. It was as if, in that small space between them, an entire world had opened, one where silence wasn't a barrier, but a bridge. "What is she saying?" the son finally asked, his voice softer now, almost uncertain. The waitress hesitated for a moment, her old shyness flickering back. But then she gently signed to the mother and spoke aloud. "She says, this is the first time in a long time someone has spoken to her like this. She feels seen." Her voice trembled slightly on the last word. The son swallowed hard, his eyes glistening. He looked at his mother, who reached out and took the waitress's hand, squeezing it tightly, as she signed something slower this time, more deliberate. The waitress watched closely, then smiled through forming tears. "She says, you have a beautiful soul, and she's grateful you didn't ignore her." Around them, the soft hum of the restaurant had faded into a quiet stillness. Even the staff had paused, watching the exchange with a kind of reverence. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but it carried a weight that settled deep in the chest. The son leaned back in his chair, running a hand over his face as if trying to steady himself. "Do you know," he said quietly, "how many places we've been where people just give up trying?" His voice cracked slightly. "They talk to me instead. They look past her." The waitress nodded, her eyes lowering for a second. "I've seen that happen," she admitted softly. "I didn't want to be another person who did that." For a moment, no one spoke. Then, the mother signed again, her hands slower now, filled with emotion. The waitress translated, her voice barely above a whisper. "She says, tonight, she doesn't feel invisible." That was the moment the son broke. He let out a shaky breath, his composure slipping as tears filled his eyes. He reached across the table, placing his hand over his mother's, then looked up at the waitress, with a gratitude so deep it didn't need many words. "You have no idea what this means to us," he said. But somehow she did. The rest of the evening unfolded with a softness that lingered in every corner of the restaurant. What had started as an ordinary shift had quietly transformed into something unforgettable. The shy waitress stayed close to their table, not out of obligation, but because something in her heart refused to step away. She continued, signing with the mother's simple things at first, about the food, the warmth of the tea, the calmness of the night. But soon their conversation deepened, filled with memories, gentle jokes, and moments of shared understanding that needed no sound. The son watched it all, his earlier composure replaced with quiet reflection. Every now and then, he would ask the waitress to translate, but more often, he simply observed, letting himself absorb the joy on his mother's face. It was a kind of happiness money had never been able to buy for her, a connection, a recognition, a sense of belonging in a world that so often rushed past her silence. When the meal came to an end, the mother reached into her purse and pulled out a small, worn notebook. Her hands trembled slightly as she wrote something down, then gently handed it to the waitress. The girl hesitated before taking it, her fingers brushing against the older woman's, as if afraid the moment might break. She looked down at the page. "You reminded me that I still have a voice." Tears filled her eyes instantly. The son stood up then, reaching into his coat pocket. For a moment, it seemed like he would simply leave a generous tip and walk away like any other customer. But instead, he placed a neatly folded card on the table and slid it toward her. "If you're willing," he said carefully, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "I'd like to offer you something more than just thanks." She looked at him, confused. "I run a foundation," he continued, "one that supports people with hearing impairments, education, access, dignity. But what we've always lacked is someone who truly understands both worlds, the way you do." He paused, his gaze sincere. "Come work with us. Help us change things for people like my mother." The waitress froze, her heart pounding. Just hours ago, she had been invisible to most of the room. Now, her quiet skills, something she had carried for personal reasons, something no one had ever really noticed, was being seen as something powerful. I don't know what to say," she whispered. The mother smiled gently and signed one last sentence. The waitress watched her hands, then let out a soft, tearful laugh. As she translated, she says, "Sometimes the smallest voices create the biggest change." The restaurant lights seemed warmer somehow as they left, hand in hand. And for the first time in a long while, the shy waitress didn't feel like she was fading into the background. She felt seen,